Hello, my name is Simon Lewis, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words for the Lithuanian Spring Poetry Festival. And thank you to the organisers who've been working so hard in these very challenging times. I thought I might maybe tell you a little bit about my connection to Lithuania. Now, Simon Lewis probably doesn't sound like a Lithuanian name to you, which of course it isn't. My mother's maiden name was Morris, which still isn't a very Lithuanian name. However, her grandfather was born Mosevich, which might sound slightly more familiar. And around the early part of the 20th century, my great-grandfather decided to anglicize his surname. And in his mind, Irish people were more likely to purchase things from a Morris rather than a Mosevich. That was his opinion, I suppose, at the time, like many migrants from Lithuania to Ireland. Many Lithuanians will be familiar with Ireland in the last 25 years, when many of them came over here to work during what Ireland calls the Celtic Tiger. Some of you may be familiar with that term, while Ireland was having a very good economic situation. In fact, some may have even thought, some of these Lithuanians that moved to Ireland 25 years ago or so, might have even thought they were the first Lithuanians to step a foot on Irish soil in the 1990s when our economy was starting to boom. However, I have bad news. 150 years before that, my family, along with hundreds of other Lithuanians, came to Ireland. Now, back then, they were escaping the Russian Empire, and they had to escape from the pogroms that were happening at the time. Now, most Irish Jews come from one area of Lithuania, and that's an area called Kaunas, as you would know, or Kovno, as they would have called it, the second city of Lithuania. Now, the majority actually came from an area in the region, so not actually the city itself, called Achmezhan. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But so much so, actually, that Irish Jews originally, when they came over, called themselves Achmezhanites for many, many years, and that's what they were known as in Ireland, which is quite interesting. And when we're charting history, often some great stories fall into folklore, and some are even accepted as the truth. And I thought one of the most famous stories about how Lithuanian Jews came from Lithuania to Ireland is the most famous of them all, and it's the one I love to tell. Basically, the story goes that the Jews were escaping the pogroms, and they really wanted to get to America, which they knew, which was called the Golden Medina, I suppose, because there was riches ahead if they got to America. But the ships sailing across Europe had a number of stops along the way. So one of those stops was in Cork, which is Ireland's second city. And when the ship, now the story goes that when the ship landed at the port in Cork, and according to legend, the captain shouted, "Welcome to Cork." And the people on board thought he said, "New York, welcome to New York," instead of Cork. So they stepped off the ship. Now, you'd be surprised how many Irish Jewish families will tell you that's exactly how their family got to Ireland. Now, I don't believe it's true. I think the story is probably a little less funny and probably more like my first poem that I'm going to read for this speech. It's called Isaac Sandler. The Sanders would have been one of the first families who came from Lithuania to Ireland. A horn blows sounds and clouds as a boat docks into Queenstown, a morning welcome. Often I go to meet the ones who survived the Tsar, the walk to Riga, the black rats that killed your people on board the ship. Every face is a mirror of mother or father, and though I have to ask about them, the answer is always in their walk across the harbour platform. What is true is that these migrants did end up in Cork City, and they formed the main basis of the entire Jewish community in Ireland. As an aside, just so you know, my father's side also are from a Jewish background, and they came to Ireland too, into Northern Ireland, but they came through the linen business through from Scotland to Northern Ireland, and they would have been from Polish heritage. But anyway, I digress. Most Jewish people living in Ireland for the majority of the 20th century could claim ancestry to one area of Lithuania. These people mainly settled in one area of Cork City, just a small little part of Cork City, not quite a ghetto in the strictest of senses, or of the strictest definition of the word, but the area became known as Jewtown. Now, that might sound bad. In today, calling an area Jewtown would not sound good, but back then it wasn't meant in a derogatory way. In fact, the vast majority of people were very nice to what they called these aliens, as they were known in those days. And this poem, maybe a very short poem, might show that. It's called Landsmannschaft. This place may not have skyscrapers, the Brooklyn Bridge, or dreams of gold, diamonds, precious stones. So we find pebbles by the river, skim the flat ones as far as they go, and we laugh with our neighbours. Though we don't speak their language, they tip their hats to us like friends. Cousin, I think you'd like it here. Moving from Lithuania's second city to Ireland's second city was, of course, very difficult for my ancestors. They didn't speak English, never mind Irish, and although they were skilled, many fell into menial jobs, usually peddling, which is traveling from house to house selling things, or working in factories. In my book, Jewtown, which is named after the area, I try to reimagine some of these people and chart their journeys from new migrants to settling into Irish society and assimilating in many cases. And they certainly did do that. Over time, this new community has produced several well-known politicians, sports stars, and artists. The most famous Jewish person who came, whose family came from Lithuania, was Gerald Goldberg, and he became the Lord Mayor of Cork City in the 1970s. His nephew also holds a special place, especially in the world of arts, in Ireland's arts community. His name is David Marcus, and David Marcus was the founder of New Irish Writing, and he can definitely claim to have discovered and started the writing careers of hundreds of Irish writers and artists. The Cork Jewish community, at its peak, had over 300 families, but it did slowly decline after the 1930s as people moved to bigger cities like Dublin, and many did make it to America after all. Many also moved over to Israel when Israel was founded, and often to other bigger communities in England, South Africa as well. This poem is about one such family when her son leaves Cork to go to America. It's called Chollant. We ate chollant the night we left Kovno. I make it today before Ezra goes to marry his bride. In Cork, it has been easy to find folk to barter onions, eggs, potatoes for scrap metal. O'Shea, the farmer, threw a goose into the cart for Ezra's help. I have spent the month hiding sugar saved for butter beans, kneaded dough for hours for dumplings. The simple bit was tossing everything in a pot, and I just wait for the sound of water boiling, the heat filling the room, infusing the smells of my mother's kitchen in Kovno that spread out through the rooms of our house and out to the rest of the village, to the noses of the blacksmiths, tailors, craftsmen in the shtetl. The syrup stewing, overpowering the onion on the stove until the exact moment before it starts to burn. The bitter-sweet smell my mother remembered that night she cooked for me before I left for Kovno. Today, the aroma is locked in a tiny home in Cork, and later we'll eat chollant together before Ezra goes. By the 1980s, the community had dwindled to a handful of people. The second wave of migration to Ireland in the 1990s failed to increase the Jewish community, and by 2016, the last remaining synagogue in Cork closed, marking the end of this community known as the Achmashonites. It might be fitting to end this little speech with the final poem in the collection, which is The Last Sabbath at South Terrace Synagogue. Shipped in from Dublin, the men gathered like beetles around the orange glow of gas heaters, grumbling as the Sabbath candles were lit. Above them, the women looked down from the crumbling balcony at the ruins. The walls twinkling with dew, the rot chewing the panels, and the blue velvet table covers airbrushed by damp. The men shifted in the pews as their knees stiffened, and they mumbled along to the cantor's funereal chant. At the front of the shul was Freddie Rosehill, his silver crutch rooted to the carpet, bearing the weight of his body. The synagogue, 120 years of peddlers, grocers, directors. His face, red with the strain, gave in by the first Kaddish prayer, drooping back into the pew, knowing he was part of the furniture, ready to be moved on. Thank you so much, and the very best of luck with the festival, and I look forward to joining you in Lithuania soon. Take care now. Thank you. Bye-bye.